Hey there, it's Molly. Who else would it be, right? With this background especially. So many years ago, I wrote an ebook called Getting Free from Fear, and I think it's now under the title Breaking the Habit of Fear. And I got an email this week from a young gentleman who asked me a question about it. So in the ebook, one of the things I point out is a distinction I learned from Timothy Galway, and that's the difference between what he calls fear 1 and fear 2. Fear 1, I actually forget which is which, but we'll just say fear 1 is fear that corresponds to an external threat. There's a saber-toothed tiger coming to get you. It would be a really good idea to get the heck out of Dodge. That's fear 1. As soon as the threat is removed, the fear dissipates. The body returns to a default state. Fear 2 is fear that is completely out of keeping with the external threat. Fear 2 may even be caused by an external threat, but it continues to run after the threat has been removed. PTSD would be an example of fear 2. Being overly concerned about performance is an example of fear 2. There are tons of examples. And one of the ways that Galway recommended you work with fear 1 and fear 2 is to do an assessment of the actual risk. So you look at the information and assess, is this really as risky as it feels? I'm doing this because it was in a book about skiing. And you would assess, what is the actual slope here that I'm so afraid of? And the young man who wrote me said, my fear is illogical, so I can't really gather information to validate or disvalidate it, invalidate it. And I said to him, and this is more in line with my current thinking about fear, that's great. If you can't gather information that supports your fear, that is a beautiful demonstration of what's always true anyway, that your thinking is causing your fear. We live in the feeling of our thinking, not in the feeling of our circumstances, not in the feeling of the saber-toothed tiger. Our feelings are always a response to a mental process, either conscious or unconscious. And when we know that, we can relax our thinking. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but that's kind of how I think about it. Instead of grabbing onto a thought, instead of grabbing onto fear or worrying about being afraid, we can let it pass through. It might pass through in a few minutes, it might take a week, but it will pass through. It absolutely will. It does every time. And the more we trust that process and the less we get in there and try to fix it, the more quickly it'll pass through in general. So if you're dealing, as we all do, with fear, and if that gets its grip on you, recognize you don't have to grip back. It will dissipate. You're only responding to your thinking. Recognize that, let your thinking develop and flow, and you're going to be great. Thanks. I hope this was helpful.